afternoon, Tottenham. So yes, my name is Torange Khonsari, and I suppose we pride ourselves a little bit in terms of that we try and make places, or not make them, but protect them sometimes for our commonwealth and our public good. So I suppose in the last 15 years, my experience really comes from having worked in the grassroots in different communities up and down the country, and hearing over and over again people's frustrations and anger in how little agency they have in how their neighborhoods are changing, how their neighborhoods gets developed. And I mean, this is nothing new, you all know it, you probably all are part of that, have that frustration. But that, together with the diminishing of our public and community assets, be it kind of libraries or town halls, courtrooms now, and public spaces, together with kind of a lack of trust that is happening between institutions and civil society, is all kind of adding to this incredible inequality that we are facing today. It's kind of social and wealth inequality. Now, what I want to talk to you about a little bit today is something that is kind of taking hold quite strongly, definitely around Europe and also in the States, which is something called the commons. The commons are what we hold as our wealth, our common wealth, be it air, be it land, be it natural resources, be it even money or knowledge or culture. So these are resources, and how do we design systems around which we can share equally, share these resources, manage them, use them, and make decisions about them. What I'm going to talk about is primarily land and a little bit knowledge. But the other thing I want us to look at a little bit is this idea of civic. What does civic mean? So it's about this relationship between the state or institutions of power, if you like, and civil society. And at the moment, what's happening, we have this power structure like this. The relationship is here, and we have this power structure, and this is creating all sorts of inequality again, and that, be it in decision making, be it in things happening without your say-so, decision making, or ownership, so on and so forth. So what happens if that power shifts and we start to talk about relationships of collaboration between civil society and public sector? So this relationship, even if it's a little bit like this, that's okay, as long as it's not this. So this kind of relationship, once it becomes collaboration, then how does that look like? How could that look like in terms of land ownership? How could that look like in terms of decision making about how our cities are developed? How does that look like in terms of how we have agency and how civil society becomes empowered in order to build the environments within which they live? Then there is the other thing, which me as an architect, I'm interested in the relationship of where the architect sits within this. So majority of the time they sit up here with the powers, the money and the power. But what happens if they sit in the middle here and negotiate these positions, but for the good of the society? What is also happening is that all of our public civic spaces are being pushed to the margins. So they're no longer prime sites. So we either have, a bit of abandoned site next to a railway station, or a little gap site here, or a little crappy room over there. So there's kind of, they're all being shoved into kind of undevelopable, if you like, lands. And all our prime land is becoming privatized real estate. Okay, so maybe even that's okay. Maybe it's even that we have to protect that, because at one point that also will become very valuable. And that's what I want to talk about in a minute in terms of how do we construct these urban commons. So imagine we have lots of these small marginal lands Each one of them has a community around it who are stewards of it, are protecting it, using, governing, and making decisions about it. But you have lots of them around the city, or you have lots of them in a neighborhood like Tottenham. And then by actually them coming together, we are now today in a network society. So if they're networked together, you're creating a really, you have solidarity of all these kind of sites and spaces coming together. So that's, you've scaled that up in a way, and that can create the commons in that, in the urban context. So, so how do we start? We have this site, we need land. Okay, actually it's easier to negotiate small land than it is to negotiate prime land. So, and that again becomes about that collaboration. If you start it as a collaboration between the landowner and civil society, you need an organization. So it's a community organization who negotiates the land for a period of 2 years, 3 years. It's temporary use. So then you can, if you need a structure on it, then you can build a temporary structure. If you don't need a structure on it, if it's existing buildings, then it's existing buildings, it doesn't matter. But this temporary architecture becomes a way to actually, for that period of time, claim the land and start to kind of build social capital. So events is something that actually, even in regeneration, they don't really think is something that is important. They just think it's a nice thing you do to have a social event. Events are incredibly important because they build social relationships, and they can range from a dialogue you have to an event, a festival, a workshop, a walk, and so on and so forth. So designing the infrastructure of event around that to build the social capital is really, really important. And it's again a kind of very, it needs to be quite a deliberate design almost, and everybody can do that. So I'm not saying this should be kind of expert. Then evidencing. I've been into so many community organizations and groups who are doing amazing work. And then I say, okay, so where is it? Where's your map of the walks you do? Or where are your photographs? Oh, we forgot to take the photographs. Or the maps are in my head, or things like that. And that doesn't help because you can't evidence it. We're living in a world where economic thinking is ruling. So for that, we need evidence. So we need to build evidence. Either it can be in these reports, which the knowledge could come from somebody within the community who has that knowledge to do that, or films, or even photographs on blogs and websites and so on. Then learning. So for years, the process of how you engage in communities has been about the model of engagement. But actually, there's a huge amount of learning and knowledge that both exists in communities that is just not being looked at seriously. And so people just make the same mistakes generation after generation. And then there is actually the other thing, which is certain knowledge that might be necessary to come from outside, and people don't know how to access that. So this kind of how you also bring knowledge and learning into communities in order for even as basic as how do communities work together rather than collaborate, rather than compete, is really, really important. Okay, so you have the site, you have the structure, you have the community, you've evidenced it, you have to now have an organizational form for this thing, this civic space, this civic building or space. So even in that, what happens most of the time, people just kind of go into a default position and have a hierarchical organizational structure. You have a chair, you have these kind of management body, and then you have the others. And usually these people are already empowered people. So again, you still don't have the equality that we're talking about. So there are models out there, these are just two, and they're called dynamic governance, where it's about horizontal decision making, where everybody in that organization is heard, everybody in that organization is involved in decision making, and if there are ownership issues around the organization in terms of intellectual property or land or whatever it might be, even that is very clearly written into the organizational structure. So equality needs to then be applied at every level. So then, very briefly, that's all very well if you're volunteering for a period of time, but you need to sustain these things. You need to sustain these civic spaces for them to be enduring. And for that, you need a business case. You need a business model. Again, it's not about moving into a kind of structure which is, again, extractive in terms of financially, but one like the Economy for Common Good organization, who actually balance out the financial aspects of a project or a business and its social good and common good. So it is also a perfect way to then actually be arguing for this as equally important when you're talking about a business plan. Yeah, and this is the last thing I'm going to talk about. I've, again, having been in communities for so many years, and as much as the fantastic stuff that happens, we have to also be aware of things that go wrong, like turf wars, like power struggles between community groups and conflicts and things like that. And I think there is also, and this can be really destructive in the construction of the commons, because you really need solidarity. And so having seen some of those and having seen some of the stuff that I earlier talked about in terms of knowledge that is just not being recognized, we set up an initiative called the School for Civic Action. And the School for Civic Action is really a platform that actually anybody could become a teacher on it. So the students could at one point become teachers, the local residents could be teachers, and it's really about a tool for empowerment around knowledge, but at the same time for that knowledge to have somewhere to live and to be distributed and disseminated. One way that we do that also is that we have really ad hoc civic classrooms within every project that at the moment we set up, or we go into communities and set up civic classrooms where this kind of, the School for Civic Action in a way can live with all this kind of knowledge sharing. One thing that has been very, very successful is developing a very different curriculum vitae, which is not about your formal qualification, but about your life skills, your civic engagement, what you've done, your peculiar skills, your household knowledge. And once you sit down with people, people sit down and go, oh no, I don't have anything, I don't know anything, I don't have any skills. And as you kind of continue to talk to them, as you continue to draw things out, they're even amazed by the end when they see how much actually skills and knowledge they have. Then if they're happy to do that, the next stage of it is really for us to work with them to turn them into some kind of educational class, if you like. And that has a really empowering effect, which is really, really important. And we're doing this in Southwark at the moment. That is how some of the courses that end up being at the School for Civic Action become things like, how do you join plastic bottles to make a chair because somebody had done that? Or how do you make fertilizer out of, I've forgotten the plant now, anyway. Or how you start a community land trust. I mean, this was something that came from a lot of people wanted to know about it. Or how you make tile dyes out of plants. Okay, so what this says is design ecosystems of learning. So in a way, what is really important is that those ecosystems really are things that we design within the learning environment, from dialogue to other kind of seminars or walks and things like that. And anyway, so this is an open platform. I hope it has helped some of you to take action and come and speak to me if you want to know more.